It is. You are actually. That is very Bet Lynch.
Is it more Bet Lynch or David Lynch?
I tell you who it is. It's Donny's hair off on the buses.
Rude. It's flipping warm, is what it is.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking About Who. And this week we are talking about season 25. Yeah, that's right. I'm Paul or P-Bal, and then today, as ever, I am joined by...
Good evening, it's James.
And good evening, it's Jason. Oh, my Lord, what are you coming as today?
Margie Clark.
Bet Lynch.
I can't do the accent.
Bet Lynch.
We will talk about my character later on in our review.
Oh, I think I know who it is.
Margaret Thatcher's gone terribly glam. Anyway, if that hasn't scared you off already, we're going to start with Remembrance of the Daleks. I did my McCoy rolls, Remembrance, because he likes a bit of Remembrance and he does a bit of Dalek, and he's all over that.
Yes, you'll be well away when you get down the Ragnarok later.
Oh, I can't roll my R's, that's annoying.
Jason's all over the Ragnaroks, I can tell you. So who's got their intro for this one, boys?
I'll take a lead on this one then. We'll start as we mean to go on in this season. And we are actually at the start of the 25th anniversary season with a return to Coal Hill School and 1963 London. Back where it all began, two Dalek factions are fighting over the Hand of Omega. And the Doctor and Ace, I've got to say, one step ahead of them to save the day. What a start. What a start to the season. Gets off to a real bang here with this story. This is different in tone from the get-go from season 24. And they're out of the starting blocks. And both of the regulars on form from the minute they walk out of the TARDIS. We're into a good, beefy, proper Doctor Who story here. And it's one of my favorites, I think, in this season, that's for sure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Remembrance of the Daleks, I'm going to say up front, is my favorite Dalek story for lots and lots of reasons, which we'll go into. You're right, this is the start of the sort of tonal shift with Sylvester's Doctor becoming a bit darker, a bit more manipulative. We see that through this story. We see it through subsequent stories. And for me, this, we talked about this previously about our eras of Doctor Who. This was the one that was on when I was at school. This is the one I was talking to people about. And, things like the Dalek going up the stairs, which I know we talked about recently when we looked at Genesis of the Daleks, and not Genesis, the other one. Destiny, and sort of Tom taking the mickey out of the Dalek for not being able to climb up after him, and then you get that shot where it's following Sylvester up the stairs. There's so many things that I love in this story. Plus the backdrop. So you've got the backdrop of the sort of social times that they're in. You've got deals with racism, but in a really subtle way. Just the card on the B&B window, for example. There's these little touches in there as well to pick up on, as well as a really good story.
Funny thing about Remembrance is that 1960s to us is a period setting because it's 50 years ago now, but at the time it was only 20 years. It's sort of like doing a 90s story now, isn't it? Just to make everyone feel really uncomfortable. It's the same sort of lag there, isn't it? We could all be here in cargo pants listening to Hearsay, and it's the same sort of age gap that we're looking at here.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a scary thought.
Cheered everyone up.
Wow.
Yeah, similarly, I can remember watching this as a little Bal. So I'd have been 6 years old. But the abiding memory of watching this as a kid actually with Mum coming home from the shopping and giving me an egg box and saying, "There you go, that's your Dalek spaceship." Because it, I mean, it's chilling, isn't it? It's quite similar. I mean, I had to wait a few years before getting, look at this piece of magic.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
We're not worthy to be on the same screen.
No, I mean, the joy, I think we might have discussed Apple toys before, but the joy of these, that any form of sort of action engagement with any of them was rewarded with bits breaking off instantly. They were not made for fighting, were they? I don't think I had a single one that didn't have an eye stalk not held on by either super glue or when that broke off, bit of blue tack. They were all quite brutalized.
I'm not entirely sure the new props that they built for this story were built to last either.
No, there's a few shots, slightly sadly, where they've switched to the wheel balls, isn't it? And they look a bit they look a bit doddery, and it's a shame because obviously they changed their minds and went back to, so it's a bit of a shame.
Especially when they're going across the cobbles. It's just like not even a flat surface; they're just like wobbling along.
But I think we said on the season 17, I love a big bang, and you get some proper booms, don't you, with this one? I kind of love when the Daleks are shooting you. They shoot 7 bells of shit out of you. They are going for it, aren't they? The sound effects of it and the explosions are all quite, they're real. You can sense them.
And they set off a terror alert because the explosions were so big that actually people were phoning the emergency services to say there's been bearing in mind the time, they thought it was like an IRA bomb had gone off because the explosions were so loud, and it was like a Sunday morning they were filming because the streets were quiet. So there was some real sort of pyrotechnics in this episode. I'm
surprised they didn't call international rescue in, to be honest.
Sophie Sophie's a member of Fanderson. That helps anything. She's a big fan of Gerry Anderson. I do like that little scene thing because talking to you, I like that because you have the Grey Daleks blow up and they properly blow up a couple of the Imperials, and then they go out and they get their special weapon. The special weapon just boom. He does the lot. He like boom.
That special weapons Dalek. That is something else. In reality, it can shoot 2 or 3 Daleks all in one go. Why were they not all shaped like that Dalek? Why were they not shaped like it all?
Well, in the novelization, boys and girls, if you do delve into this, they refer to it as, I think, as the mutant or something. It's not a well-regarded Dalek by other Daleks because it's, again, not pure enough in its blobbiness. I think it's another stage on in its blobbiness, to use the vernacular from the story. So it's yeah.
Yeah, they do that in one of the audio stories, and one of the Big Finish stories they explain. Again, they are quite different to normal Daleks, so they're not necessarily liked, and they're proper, they're really sort of quite vile creatures, which is why they end up in the casings.
Yeah. Not pure in their blobbiness.
Exactly. No one's going to argue with the one that's got the bigger gun, are they?
No. So I think it's really well directed from the. I mean, it's really well directed, full stop. But I think Andrew gets how to direct Daleks, which not every director does. So I think you get lots of the eye shots. I love all the eye with the computer and the graph. I love all that. That's all great. I mean, it's kick-ass, isn't it? I mean, the first shots, I've turned it lighter. The first soldier to get shot, tipping when he's hurled backwards, and the extermination effects. All that. I mean, even now, it all looks incredible. That's great. It just looks impressive. The Daleks are scary. They are taking it seriously. They are a threat, and I think that's why this works.
Indeed, it's a serious Dalek story, and you're right. The effects are a step up on anything that we'd already seen before. But the thing that blew me away at the time watching it, first off, was just how many Daleks there actually were. I mean, if you think about it, I'd grown up through the 70s watching Doctor Who, And, you had 3 Daleks in Day of the Daleks trying to take over the world. And here you've got a whole army, and it's not CGI. They really have gone all out to try and give us that sort of epic Dalek battle between the 2 factions that, we'd only previously read about, if you like, in comics.
Yeah, because you've got
don't mention the comics. Don't mention the comics.
Yeah, because you've got the 2 different factions, but then you've got the Black Dalek who is running one, and then you've got obviously the reveal later on in the story as to who's running the other set of Daleks. And there's some really nice bits as well where you feel that they're a threat. Often I find sometimes when there's hundreds of, a CGI Daleks, it's not really a threat because that there's going to be some really easy solution to getting rid of them. In that first scene when you're in the junkyard and it's picking off the soldiers one by one, and you're right, the effects are great, and you really do, feel that there's a menace there. And it takes the Doctor to sort of lure it out and then blow it up next to a pile of bricks. And I love that. I love that he is just like, right, I'm gonna deal with this situation, and uses the explosives to blow it up. And then later on, they're being chased down the road by one, and there is that sense of peril. But then you've got Ace as well, who takes on, a Dalek with a baseball bat. It blows one up with an anti-tank rocket. So there's some proper engagement rather than sort of, we're going to run around for the Daleks until the end. There are some really good sequences where they do have to fight for their life. They do have to destroy Daleks. And I like that.
Who are you calling small? It's a good one.
It's a great sequence. I mean, you can tell that Sophie's really in her element. She's loving this sort of filming, and she's attacking the scenes with some gusto. I mean, don't forget, this is essentially her second story, and she's so well settled in the role by this point. But that whole thing around the laboratory with the bashing the Dalek up, and then down in the corridor, and she's surrounded by the Daleks. There's a real sense of menace in the way that they're approaching. Okay, the cliffhanger probably holds a little long, but there's a sense of menace in the whole sort of sequence there, because she's on her own and she's fighting the Daleks, but she's giving them a good bit of what for there. But ultimately, the menace is there all the way through, particularly in all the other little sequences, and as the battle sequences at the end, I think are among some of the best I think we've had in the series history.
I think there's an outtake, isn't it? 'Cause I think Sophie might have started beating the poop out of the wrong Dalek prop. I think it's not the stunt one that she goes for to start with. They're like, no, don't break it, we've got to keep filming. But yeah, I think we've sort of discussed with a few different stories about a sort of jump on point or a sort of reboot. I think if you watch Remembrance, you can feel that this is almost like it's been off air or something, and this is a new start. It's not that far away from season 24, but it feels like it's had a moment to just go, right, that probably wasn't working, that did work, let's go at it like this. And I think even Ace's character from Dragonfire has modified in the interim period, and it just feels like this is a sort of starting point. And I think if we could all do the time travel thing, but were the BBC actually behind the show at this point, they could have really gone, this is something that is working. Hurrah, Saturday tea time, let's go for this. They obviously didn't, but it does feel like a fresh start. And it's a sort of a shame that it's only 4 stories. It could have just been a little longer. It could have been 6 stories. I think the energy's there and the intent's there, and I think the creativity's rolling with it, and it's just a shame that the series isn't a little bit longer.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we were shortchanged this season. I didn't feel it in season 24. I also felt it in 26. I feel we were shortchanged there as well, because these 2 seasons, especially this one, this sort of spearheads the start of what is classed as the Cartmel master plan, if you want to give it a handle, and they clearly had an idea of where at this stage they wanted to take McCoy's interpretation of the Doctor, and there'd been glimpses of it in the previous season, but this is full on. You almost feel like there's a lost season between 24 and 25, because this is definitely more grown up. It's more, this is Doctor Who on steroids. They genuinely, in the production element of it, they believe in the show that they're making. They really are pushing this. This isn't the last hurrah. This is a, come on, we're going to show you what we can do. We're still smarting a little bit that you've popped us off Saturday night and we're into a weekday slot. But we'll show you what we can do here. They're still casting great casts. There's some great talent working on the show behind the scenes. We've said Andrew Morgan's direction of this is on point throughout. It looks like it's had some money spent on it, which I don't think the previous season for me looked like it had lots and lots of money spent on it. So, maybe it was just because it was the 25th anniversary and there was a statement to be made here. This is in a different league to the previous season.
I think you're right. I think all aspects of it. I mean, I think the writing is better. The direction is better. The things really gel together, and there's so many great characters in this story, as well as you've got this relationship between the Doctor and Ace that has, like you say, changed since we last saw them. There's a lot more sort of trust there. He's like, he does try and sideline her, but then kind of just says, well, that's not going to work. So come with me. We're going to get involved in this, and joins her a bit later on. But there's the little girl, Jasmine, I think her name is, that plays the little girl that's taken over by the Dalek computer. Really creeped me out when I remember watching this, going, there's this little girl, and when the sort of Dalek controller spins around and you see it's the little girl that you've been seeing sort of cropping up everywhere, and her voice changes, so she's got a very Dalek voice, and then it changes to the human voice.
John Leeson. She goes from John Leeson to Jasmine Breaks.
But didn't we always think that? I mean, I don't know about you, James, when you watched it the first time round, but for me, it was almost a red herring, because you almost thought that was Davros.
Yes. I was exactly the same. When I first saw it, I thought it was going to spin around. It'd be Davros, and it's like, oh yeah, here we go. And when it was this little girl, and then she was like firing, lightning out of her fingers. It was like, oh my God, so you've got, as well as having Daleks all over the place, this girl that can go around killing people with, her powers from her fingers. It was, and characters like Ratcliffe that are more than just there for the sake of it. His attitudes. He's got very sort of the time social attitudes as well, and it's very subtly done. But I love that aspect of this story, is that there's lots of different characters. We'll talk about the scientific side of things and the army side of things. So, Captain Chunky Gilmore and his team. I keep wanting to call them countermeasure teams, but that's the big finish of taking that on. There are some really great characters that you instantly go, oh, I get that person. I understand what they're like, and you want to see more of them.
I think You Were Born to Serve the Daleks is another one of my put downs that I quite like using. I should probably put that as a PS sometimes when I'm dealing with an agent. It is interesting. I think it's beneficial having a four-parter, because you can flesh out the characters, but there's a lot more going on for everybody. You sort of feel for everybody, and you feel therefore if someone gets killed, and so there's a connection with all the situation. But I suppose we should address the cast. I mean, what a cast! I mean, Simon Williams is doing his Simon Williams officer thing, and that's great. He's brilliant as Gilmore. Pam, I adore Pam, so say much more than that. And Karen is great, and it's fun. They're such an instant team and an instant believable team. There's a chemistry there with the three of them, which for someone who I don't I don't listen to a lot of Big Finish. I have listened to Countermeasures, and Countermeasures is actually it's a great series. It's definitely, if you want to have a bit more remembrance, check it out. It's a good listen. It's entertaining. It's an entertaining series, and you can completely see that they've got enough about them to carry on as a unit.
I just wonder why they stopped short though of actually that being an early iteration of Unit. I just wonder why they stopped short in the program on it.
Apparently in one of the original writer scripts there was going to be a reference to someone called Lethbridge Stewart, but they ended up not putting it in. I think they wanted there to be a distinction between Unit and this group. But you're right, you could imagine it being Unit related in that respect. They fulfill that role that you would normally get on an Earthbound story.
Perhaps they didn't want to pay the copyright for it.
Possibly.
They do mention Bernard, don't they? That's their Quatermass nod, isn't it? British rock group's got its own problems. So nice that that's in the same universe.
It's almost references itself on the TV where it says, coming up next, another exciting episode of, and then it stops.
Yeah, it feels almost like a slightly awkward break of the fourth wall to a degree for me, that, because it feels very forced in, whereas things like the I Am Foreman Junkyard and the Coal Hill School, it felt part of the narrative. It didn't feel forced in, whereas I feel that television insert there we could have lost that quite easily without losing anything in the story.
I suppose it's a nice bit of light relief because it comes quite soon after Ace and the No Coloured Sign, which is quite a heavy. I'm not saying you should have one heavy moment, then one light joke. But I suppose it sort of balances out maybe the sort of theme in that sense. I mean, it does give the heads up on one of the sort of great continuity problems with Doctor Who and the Remembrance of the Daleks, in that it's 5 o'clock in November. It's very sunny outside.
And there's no fog.
No fog, no darkness. Freak weather effects from the Dalek mothership. That's the only thing I can suspect. Dursley is possibly one of the most beautiful people to have been in Doctor Who. That's quite a shallow summation.
My first Doctor Who crush. Absolutely.
Jason's was the Axon Eye, so I think that's quite a lift.
You leave my Eye of Axos alone, you.
Yeah, I will. I will merrily leave that alone.
I remember being so absolutely devastated when he's killed off, because you're like, oh my god, he was so lovely, but he turned out to be so bad. But who doesn't love a bad boy?
I've known a few.
Anyway, George Sewell as well.
Yeah.
I mean, even the sort of I say the small, but it's a high batting rate on the cast. I mean, Michael Sheard, and he's a teacher in a school. I mean, it's Bronson, surely.
I mean, cast in quite a familiar role. I think it was kind of interesting that they went for somebody who was actually quite synonymous with a school children's school drama from years ago, I suppose. Going back to George Sewell, he's pretty gritty in anything that he's in. I think George, he's got a reputation for playing the tough guys, and I think he plays the part of Ratcliffe so well. He's clearly the leader of a little group of people. He's obviously got views of his own that aren't in line with necessarily the views of the general public, but he's single-minded, and George Sewell has got a way of playing a character and just giving it that depth and that edge all the way through. A tremendous actor. I do enjoy any opportunity to watch George in any of the roles he's been in over the years.
Joseph Marcel gets one scene, but I mean, it's an incredible scene, isn't it? And one which was the talk about cutting, but it's actually quite integral to the themes around the rest of the story, isn't it, really?
And it's lovely that the story takes that time just to have that scene as well. You know, like you say, it could be really easy to say, let's cut to the action and get on with it. But actually, this is where I really love the writing of this, that it allows for that scene. Someone else might have said, no, we don't need it. But actually, I think it does add to it. It's a lovely little moment.
And we get Terry Malloy back for his third outing as Davros.
Emperor on the bridge. Emperor on the bridge. I love all that.
Doesn't the Emperor look a little bit like he did in the comics?
He did, actually. I've got to be honest. I'm sure I'd seen it somewhere before, and I'm sure it was in the TV21 comics, wasn't it?
James doesn't want to talk about the comics now.
No, he doesn't. No, that's a fact that's past us now, I'm afraid.
I like the fact that he doesn't appear until, towards the end. Again, we've talked about previous Dalek stories where it tends to be the Davros story, but actually this time they're focusing on the fact that you've got these two sort of sets of Daleks, and they are being, they're being sort of cunning and wily and trying to knock each other out to find the Hand of Omega. So Davros doesn't really appear until the very end, and that's really just so that the Doctor can defeat him, and and you see that darker side of the Doctor where he destroys Skaro. He tricks Davros into doing it, which again, he's quite matter of fact about it. It's like, right, that's it, they're dispatched. Let's move on, and that's kind of the trend for that Doctor.
It is, and it's all part of that whole thing. It's the change in the character, isn't it? Where you're now really quite clearly seeing him manipulating some situations and pulling some strings behind this. He's the puppet master to a degree now, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he's got in his head what he wants this outcome to be. It feels very premeditated. It happens a couple of times in this season, but this feels very premeditated.
Yeah. It's like he's, he left the Hand there in his first incarnation, and now he's coming back to finish the job. But, it is quite, he gives that whole speech and he talks about unlimited rice pudding and things like that, which is great. But then you realise he's building up to essentially wiping out the Daleks' home planet, but not him. Not himself. And this is the sort of trend, is that he doesn't necessarily do it himself, and we'll see that in other stories. Yes, he does. He instigates the destruction of ships, planets, regimes, but he doesn't necessarily do it himself. He manipulates others to do it.
A nice bit of comedy play with William Thomas when he goes to get the coffin. I think William might be one of the first people to become a new and classic actor. I'm not sure who else might predate him, but he's Boomtown, isn't he? So
yeah,
he might be one of the. He's definitely among the first to have done both. Put in the comments below if you think of anyone else that's any earlier than that.
And there's also a nice little appearance in this from one of the regulars from the history of Doctor Who, of course, Peter Halliday, who crops up in just a couple of scenes, but it's pivotal to part of the story, with the Doctor in the church yard with the Hand of Omega. But again, there's always a subtlety to the way that Peter plays a character, I think.
Yeah, it's a nice scene because he does your voice has changed, doesn't he? And several times. But yeah, I think coming back to the Doctor being the manipulator, there's also that sort of outburst in there from Rachel. Is Pam playing Rachel? Anyway, well, she does, frankly, we're reliant on the Doctor because only the Doctor knows what's going on. So there's that notion that they sort of feel like they're now playing out what he is playing out because he knows what's going to happen. And I think the end bit where he talks the Dalek to death is even more sort of sadistic than if he just destroyed it. Yeah, Ace blows them with the anti-tank thing. She's like, I was aiming for the eyepiece, which I think is quite a nice joke. But he's slightly worse than that because he doesn't just blow it up. He tells it that it's got no relevance in the universe and
but no
makes it destroy
backup,
itself.
Yeah.
It's like,
And there's some proper good Dalek acting going on there as well. That Dalek's right on the rock and roll.
yeah, he's on the full spin with the gas cartridge, isn't he?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the Daleks are impressive throughout, and they look nice, and they all look decent. They don't look like they've been cobbled or anything. And you know, the iconic moment is the stair thing, isn't it? I mean, that is the yes moment when you know, finally they're going up. It struck me that actually all 3 episodes have got very strong cliffhangers. There's another story coming later where I wasn't so struck on the cliffhanger elements, but I think you have up the stairs and you have the Daleks surrounding Ace. I mean, they take their time trying to kill her. I mean, let's be honest. They know they've got the music coming up, so they're like, we'll keep going. But then the spaceship landing. I mean, the spaceship it's incredible. It's not just on the blue screen. They've got a crane, and that's a real ship. You know, that's impressive. That looks great.
And I love the break of the fourth wall where he just sticks his head up at the end of the cliffhanger and goes, I think I may have miscalculated, and then blinks, and then it cuts to the music, and when you come back you don't see that. But I again, just a tiny little moment where you think, oh, actually this manipulator that we're starting to get to know can still make mistakes, and you know, how's he going to get out of this? Because I think sometimes towards the end of this season, it's like, is there anything he can't do? You know, he's taken on huge armadas, he's taken on, you know, lots of different villains, and he just seems to be able to just defeat them and then walk away. It's nice to be able to just see that he hasn't predicted something, or he hasn't necessarily got control of the situation as much as he would like. And I like that little touch in that cliffhanger at the end of part 3.
I think Sylvester seems completely at home now. I mean, he's confident in 24, but he's at home now. He knows where he's at. I think a lot more. He's obviously had the time to think about what he likes, what he doesn't like, what works, what doesn't work. And there's none of the there are comic touches, but there are none of like the misplaced maxims and you know, the bits of wordplay that kept peppering the last season.
No.
Which is interesting, I suppose. If you look at something like the Pat Troughton regeneration, when he starts doing comedy dress-ups and things like that, that they phase it out after about 3-4 stories. And so it's the same sort of time scale, but you have more stories in which you can get there. And I think only having the 12, I mean, especially got the TV movie, but only having like the sort of 12 sort of stories on a run here, it's not an awful lot of time to make your mark and stay there and be confident with it. But you wouldn't know that Sylvester and Sophie hadn't been doing it for 2 years.
Yeah.
Watching this story, you wouldn't know this was literally their first solo outing together.
No, you almost, as I think I've said already, it almost feels like we've lost a season somewhere in between, because they're so at ease with each other from the moment they walk out of the TARDIS doors at the beginning of the story. And it is a much more confident and a much more assured performance from Sylvester. You're quite right. Compared to where he was at the start of the previous season, the character has completely developed. It's changed. He's still got the essence of it, but it is played down to a much more palatable level. So you're getting that little bit of comedy or tomfoolery, but you're now starting to see that sort of darker element come out. And, you know, it sets the tone for the next 2 seasons, and I think we're the richer for it.
Well, I have to say that there's the BBC launch photo session for the autumn schedule, and you have lots of pictures of Sylvester with Vicky Michelle. So there's almost a feeling we could have the 7th Doctor and Yvette Carte Blanche as a pairing. And I'm slightly sad that we haven't got any stories where that happened. I mean, were we denied? Just a couple of stories.
Not sure.
Imagine how that could have. It could have gone into Cafe Rene instead of going into the one in the episode. Could have given it a whole new spin.
Well. She wouldn't have done so well against a Dalek with a piece of wet lettuce and a what is it, a whisk?
The celery.
The celery and a whisk.
Oh, Dalek! It's been great. They missed out. They missed out on doing that crossover. Mimi would have beaten up the Daleks. I can tell you that for free.
Yeah, she would have.
So, do we have any exciting facts that you'd like to disseminate?
Do you know what? We've covered quite a lot of them. There's a sort of a bit of a theme with Sylvester McCoy where he's reading books and that he liked to have a book with Doctor in the title. So in this one, it's Doctor in the House. The French Revolution book, which is in the lab, is a flashback to Susan in the first episode.
It's quite nice.
But she borrows it, doesn't she?
She does borrow it.
So it wouldn't be there.
Maybe she's been back to replace it. We don't know.
No,
don't know what happened.
We don't know. But I think I think this story gets it right with the peppering of the little bits that just give the fans something. So you get these little subtle references like the French Revolution and the fact that it's clearly Coal Hill School. The only thing I think feel we're a little bit robbed by is not having a mention at all of Ian or Barbara or Susan at all, or just some sort of a fleeting glimpse of the back of them walking down the street or something like that. Just something, I just think that might have just added a little bit more to it. But yeah, it's just that way.
I suppose there's that nice bit where he says about, she's like, I'm from 1980, where I would know if we'd had an invasion. She's like, do you know about the Yeti? Do you know about that? And she's like,
yeah.
So it's that kind of nice nod to people sort of saying, actually, if Earth was invaded every week, surely we'd be quite used to it. So it's a subtle nod. I suppose if you get it, you get it. If you don't, it's fine within the course of the narrative.
It's quite scathing at times around like humans. He's like, oh, humans, what a typical response. Or you can always trust a human to mess it up. He's quite, when he says that to Ace, he is trying to make a point. But when she says, oh, I never heard of all of these, he goes off on one about saying, how have you all survived all this time when you just never remember these things. The only other thing I would say, going back to what you were talking about, the Cartman master plan. So there was a scene that was cut where the Doctor said to Davros that he's more than a Time Lord, which is, again, some of these things ended up being dropped, but some of them do end up in some of the stories, some of the hints that there was something else that they wanted to bring out of the Doctor's character. But that was it.
So, are we cruising to a score on the Remembrance of the Daleks? The Remembrance of the Daleks? Okay, who's going first?
I'll go first. I've already said this is my favourite Dalek story, and I do adore this, and I could watch it over and over and over again, and so it gets a 10 from me.
It's a 10 from Lan. And what is Jason Clifford going to give it? Is it one he always watches and he thinks it's a really enjoyable story and he's going to give it a 6?
No, I think for me, I don't think I'm going to need to get the Marmite out for this story because I think.
And yet you just did.
Oh no, I'm not getting it out. I thought I'd just get it because I haven't got it out for the last couple of videos. So I thought I'd just wave it around there. Listen, I think you can tell by the way we talked about this story how we're feeling about it. I think generally, this is a hell of a way to start a new season. The 25th season of Doctor Who had to be something big. It had to have something bold about it. And we absolutely get it from the get-go here with this story. You've got 1963 London, you've got Coal Hill School, you've got two factions of the Daleks, you've got the Doctor being really manipulative, you've got a really fantastic script from Ben Aranovich, you have got some superb direction, and the whole thing comes together to gel into a most wonderful 10 from me.
Ooh.
Hey! I think the one thing I should crying, it's so emotional. It's just very late and I'm tired. I can remember that getting this for Christmas '93 in the tin set. That was the thing where it came with the chase and terrible cardboard packaging that you then couldn't put on the shelf next to your other videos. So you had to keep it in your tin set. They all had different Daleks underneath them, so you could have an Evil of the Daleks one and all that sort of stuff. And in the interim period, they've all rusted. They all look quite terrible, don't they now? But yeah.
I've still got it, and I had to replace it because I'd watched it so many times the VHS had worn.
I even, for my sins at the time, there was a Dalek dump bin that they used to display the VHS in. And I had that. I got it from Woolworths because I went in and I asked for it, and they put my name on the back. And when they were finished, they phoned up and said, "Do you want your Dalek dump bin?" I was like, "Yeah." So that was what I used to keep my videos in my bedroom, my Dalek dump bin. And poor mum and dad have still got that in the loft somewhere.
Oh, brilliant.
So anyway, all that. Love Remembrance of the Daleks is one of my favourite stories of all time. So this has become regular. Get the poppers out. It's a 10 from P-Bal.
Yay!
Yay!
I shall raise my champagne to you.
Or maybe if you are a popular hotel chain, you don't necessarily want the poppers in the room.
No, Premier in. I'll raise my cup of tea because I'm not a chronic alcoholic like my co-stars here.
It is quite late at night here, you know.
I'm not sure what it's got to do with alcohol, my darling. But anyway, that brings Remembrance of the Daleks on to 30 points. A lot of points. But there's 3 stories to go, and the next story is The Happiness Patrol. So will happiness prevail? Will happiness prevail? Will happiness prevail? Who's got the intro? Come on, girls.
So we're off for a fiendish fondant surprise. And so taking our slightly darker Doctor and Ace onto the next adventure, we find ourselves under the tyranny of Helen A, who, as we will talk about, the character was based on, who is running a colony where if you are unhappy or melancholy, you will be killed. So we find the Doctor and Ace on a mission to essentially instigate a regime change overnight, to sort of find out why all these people are going missing and put a stop to it. There we go.
Indeed, and if you're not happy, then you get killed in quite a bizarre way. You get killed with a candy overdose of some sort,
or a fruit machine that electrifies you.
Which looked a little bit of a juxtaposition against the plot, but hey, it's, anything goes. It's the Happiness Patrol. I'm going to put my cards on the table here. I've got to be honest, as on first watch of this story, I am afraid to say that the 18-year-old me just could not reconcile the Candyman and anything at all to do with the fact of what this story was about. Now, we'll come and talk about the political element of the story, I'm sure, as we come along. But it felt a little bit, if you come from where you were with Remembrance of the Daleks and you've watched that and you've thought this is getting off to a cracking start, when I watched this the first time round, I just felt that we'd taken a bit of a step backwards, almost back into some of the stuff that we had in the previous season. And it's interesting because I felt that that particular character within the show, for me, felt like it was a killer blow to Doctor Who at the time. And no matter how good the story was, it was difficult for me at that stage to get past that visual, and I don't know to this day why then I felt that way. It's interesting, obviously when you look back on things in retrospect, you look at things in a different way and you look at the context of the story differently. But giving you my first impression of how it was when I watched it originally, this did not feel like Doctor Who to me. This felt completely wrong.
And yet, for 6-year-old P-Bal, the Candyman was bloody petrifying. Basically, it's Bertie Bassett gone psycho, isn't it? It's horrible. It's the juxtaposition of the bright, neon, lovable sweetie man that basically wants to kill you with sweets. He wants to. It's dark, and I think as an adult, I appreciate that probably more somehow. But as a kid, it scared me. I was scared of the Candyman for sure.
I mean, this story is so dark. I mean, the Candyman scared me as a child as well, and it's the familiar turned into something quite horrific, and the scenes in the kitchen, and seeing what happened to people. There are subtle undertones to this story as well. We'll come on to, but it is a bit panto in the fact that the Candyman sticks out from all the other characters. All the other characters are all nasty characters. They're all looking to progress up this caste system. So you've got Helen A at the top, and you've got like Priscilla P and things like that. They're all trying to get up that ladder. And you've got Helen A at the top, who's like, well, don't be too ambitious, because I will get rid of you. She says to Silas P, where he says, I'm aiming for the top, and she goes, not quite the top. There is this really sinister culture surrounding the Happiness Patrol, surrounding the government and the people running this place. And then at the heart of that, you've got the Candyman, who, it's difficult to know who the villain is, because although yes, he is dispatching people, with his candy creations, he's been built by someone and he's being controlled by Helen A. But he is creepy. There's lots of different creepy aspects about this. Not just if you're not happy, you're going to get killed. There's I think Helen A talks about there being over 400,000 routine disappearances. We're talking about mass murder, which as a kid you wouldn't necessarily get. You'd see the Candyman and you'd go, that's scaring the crap out of me. As an adult, you're thinking, oh my God, how many people did they kill to maintain the regime of Helen A and all the other people? And that is quite and there are even darker moments, like when Sylvester's talking to the two snipers. We were talking about how Sylvester taught the Dalek to death in the last one, and he's just standing in front of these two guys going, it's easy, isn't it? Pull a trigger, end a life, do it. And so dark a Doctor, it's just the way he delivers that. And there are lighter moments to this episode, but on the whole, when you look at the theme and you look at the context, it is so dark.
It's quite subtle, isn't it? Because they ask about population control and have they adopted the Bureau's policies on population control, and she's like, no, we've adopted our own, and it's dark. I think it's something that you can appreciate more as an adult. I think the problem probably falls for Happiness Patrol is that I know there was talk early on about doing it at Port Merion and doing a night shoot at Port Merion, which is sort of incredibly expensive. It does sort of look a bit cardboard, and I think that's something that you can't get away from with Happiness Patrol, in that Remembrance is largely location. I mean, it's not all location, but there's a lot of location, so a lot of it's real, and the studio sets are real things. So it's schools, so it's easy to. You're creating a whole planet in the studio, and it's it feels like it's in a studio, and it feels like it's flats in a studio. And that's sort of the most painfully obvious moment for that. And I'm not going to be horrible, but the most painfully obvious moment for that is the buggies. They jump in the buggies to get away, and the buggies are going slower than if you actually just walked. Those buggies are, and the sound is like, talk louder because the sound's a bit too. So obviously the buggies seem like a really good idea because it's quite kooky. You let your buggies go around. But the reality is, actually, you're better off just getting up and running.
It is true. You're right about the studio flats and the sort of the boundaries that it had contained on it, because they weren't on location. But there was also some discussion, I understand, before as it was going through its planning stages, that they would try and shoot this almost in a film noir, sort of black and white.
It was going to be black
sort
and
of
white
angles and things. And I think had they got their own way on that, and there's lots of reasons probably why they wouldn't do it, but if they got their own way on that, I think straight away those sets would have just worked so perfectly well. It just really would have added, I think, to the sort of the whole sort of drama of it.
Yeah, so Sylvester gave an interview where he said that was they were going to film it black and white, and he really wished they had have done, because, like you say, the sets aren't great. Everything's been just sort of given a quick black wash. Just to sort of everything's bland. I find also the bits where they're in the pipes as well. It's supposed to be atmospheric and echoey, but it doesn't. It falls a little bit flat. The Candy Kitchen is okay. There's plenty of sort of stuff going on in there, but yeah, it would have been very different if they'd gone down that particular route around the overall look of it.
But like everything studio bound in Doctor Who, it's a very difficult balance to strike that sort of set design and sort of production values. And I've always had a feeling that some of that sort of 80s television drama, and in fact in some instances in the 70s particularly, but I think television dramas had a habit of overlighting. And I think this is a great example of what overlighting in this work isn't helping it, because some of the set is overlit, some of the set is underlit. You've got Helen A's sort of office, if you like, that's very overlit, and it doesn't help the sort of it just doesn't help the dramatic tension, I think, in the story at times.
I know some people do advocate just turning your colour down on your TV and having to go watching it in black and white. I've never tried that, but I think you sort of lose that ghoulish fact that the Happiness Patrol have got the clowny sort of fake smile and the pink hair, and it looks like they're cheerful, but they're not cheerful. Because of that bit, isn't there? He goes, "Can't you afford a real gun?" And she sort of shoots it, and it's kind of like they all look sort of like they're sort of bright, jolly folk. And I think if it is in black and white, they probably just look a bit frightening because of the makeup. But I've never tried that. I know some people have, say it's a different experience to watch it black and white. Maybe it'll be on the Blu-ray, they'll grade it up, but
might do.
special edition. Casting wise, I know they wanted Patricia Routledge, didn't they, for Helen A?
They did,
yeah.
But Sheila's amazing, and she's got such power.
She is, and she's we've talked about this before with Doctor Who villains. She doesn't overplay it, but she does do it. She said the reason why she took the role was because she wanted to portray it like Margaret Thatcher. And there is that, there's a grandiose to her performance, but it's not OTT. She is still quite sinister, but then you get to see, and again, you've got the Doctor's more manipulative, darker side. He doesn't just want to replace her, he wants to break her. He wants to see her crying. It's not enough to just instigate a regime change. He wants to break her, and he does it. When she sees Fifi at the end and she starts crying, her husband's left her with some other bloke in a spaceship, but it's the fact that Fifi is injured or dead that really triggers her, and he just stands there and he's like, there we go. But I do love her performance in this, and there's quite a few strong performances from women in this as well. So I like that you've got more sort of predominant women coming through in this story.
The ferocious Georgina Hale, she's a force to be reckoned with, and she's perfectly pitched for it, isn't she? She's perfectly matched to that role. And Rachel Bell's got that sort of air of sort of saucy charm. I think I'm going to say Rachel's got. I think she plays with it. She's
like the experienced woman, isn't she? She's like, I've seen a few things.
Although, I mean, if you're a Dear John fan, you're probably waiting for her to ask about people's sexual problems. But yeah, she's great, and Leslie Dunlop, it's her second Doctor Who, and it's nice she's back. Yeah. Fifi, just whilst we're on that, so Fifi is an amazing piece of work. I think that's incredible. I don't think you get much better now. It's a really convincing little doll with motions and skillfully operated. I think
and the voice of Fifi was Chris Clough. It was modulated, but the growl was Chris Clough.
That's Chris Clough's growl, is it?
It is.
Fact for you, it's Saitown's favorite turn. He gets killed by the fondant surprise. So shout out for the legendary Saitown. Nice to see him out of his Dalek and actually, centre stage, because he had just been a Dalek, hadn't he, in the serial previously.
Mm. I also think John Normington as well, as Trevor Sigma. He's I think it's he's obviously bureaucratic. He's definitely, he's got the bowler hat and he's got the sort of the tie on, and again it goes against a lot of what you're seeing going on around you. So I think again he just brings an edge to it, and the actor playing Silas P, very, very snide. It plays it well, but obviously his card's marked right from the get-go anyway, because you're not going to climb this ladder here, and obviously gets done in quite quickly. But that sort of snide character, it definitely felt at home in this story.
But they're all like that, aren't they? Like the minute someone messes up, they get arrested. It's like, the minute something doesn't go right, they're like, right, arrest that person because they look unhappy, or like you say, Silas P gets dispatched quite quickly. There's this scene later on where you've got, again, the two happiness patrol teams, and the Doctor's there going, look at them being unhappy. We're really happy, and they really do have party poppers in this one. They're standing on the stage, laughing. Really sort of, sets them against each other. And Helen A ends up having to sort of interject and say, for God's sake, this is going too far. You need to listen to me and do what I say. But again, there's that subtle manipulation of that caste system, of that belief system that you've got to be happy, otherwise you're going to be, executed essentially.
Although one of the most frightening things to be witnessed in all of Doctor Who history is Sylvester singing as time goes by on stage. It's not a treasure for the ears, is it? I have to say it's not something that. Yeah. No, maybe you gentlemen enjoyed that.
No, I'm entirely in the same camp as you are on that one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's nice, and I think the story works. I think it's believable. It's within the one night, and I like the themes of it. Do we have any factoids before we head to
Yeah, before we get to, I think it benefits from only being 3 episodes. So I think you're right. I like the fact that it all takes place on one night, and this is, quite a nice story where they suddenly appear, they realize there's a problem, and they're going to instigate a regime change. And we've kind of seen that in a few other stories, but I think it's done really, really well here in the fact that it, he does destroy Helen A by the end of it, and the rest of the supporting cast are dealt with. Fact-wise, talk about the Candyman, and actually they did contact the BBC to say about it, and the BBC had to promise not to use his image again. They said that they agreed that it didn't breach the sort of I'm not sure what's copyright or the image. They agreed that he didn't breach that. However, the BBC had to agree that they would never use the image again. So it was a little bit too close to what it should have been. Real life Bertie Bassett. That was it, really.
But did Bassett say that they were glad the BBC were happy? The BBC said that they were happy, they were glad.
They sent Sheila Hancock round to talk to them.
Oh, so I think we're going to head to a score.
Yeah,
I think that's a good. I think it's a good one. I'll start us off with this.
Go on then, Jason C.
I'll start us off on this one. So I started when I first spoke about this story at the beginning of this segment, where I said the 18-year-old me sat there, watched this with some horror, I think, of what was playing out on screen, and not really getting what this was about. Some years on, watching it back a couple of times now, but watching it back particularly for this review, I am struck somewhat by the depth of this script. I think there are a lot of levels at play here, and the whole sort of Thatcher and the strikes and that sort of darkness and that gloom and that despondency, and everybody needs to be happy, and you've got this sort of almost Orwellian utopia or dystopia even going on. And I look at this story now and I think, actually, this is a good story. It's 3 episodes, it's tight. I can see an awful lot more in the story now that I'm a little older and a little wiser than I could when I was younger. And this certainly stands well and has a place in this season. It displays further darkness about the Doctor, which I kind of like as well. So to surmise my score, I'm going to be giving the Happiness Patrol a very comfortable 8.
Ooh. Gosh, you can tell he's had a drink.
Did you have a stern word with the 18-year-old you that first watched it and said, that there was a lot more to it?
You wouldn't have a stern word with an 18-year-old. Anyway.
Language. No. I mean, look, we all change our views on things as life goes on. But, a story.
I still love Sonia. I loved her when I was 6.
A story I didn't appreciate back then, I appreciate now. And I think it would be a higher score if there were better production values. I mean, I'm not knocking the story. I mean, that feels like I'm being a little cruel, but I'm not, because actually I can see this in a film noir, and I can sort of, I think this could almost be cinematic in its approach, and you could have got away with those sets. But I think an 8's a fair score for this story for me.
So, James W.
Yeah, I'm the lowest in the cast system, aren't I? As a W.
We all know I'd be happy with a Paul B. It wouldn't be quite the top, but it'd be high enough.
I have to change my surname. Lots of things that I do really like about this story, and I find that this is one of those stories that, as time goes by, when you look at the sets and things, it's not necessarily the nicest thing to look at. The story itself, though, stands quite well in time, and even things like where they're calling everyone that's a visitor Sigma. It reminds me of political viewpoints and things like that we experienced more recently, where outsiders are labeled because the caste system, and even sort of a few years ago where they were looking at the happiness index. I don't know if you remember seeing that, where they were trying to test how happy everyone in the UK was. I don't know whether they were getting their ideas from previous episodes of Doctor Who or not. I don't know. But I think for me, the darkness, the tone, the political aspects of it are all really enjoyable. And I did give this 8.5.
Ooh. Wow. I should say also, I love Dominic Glynn's music. I think that works really well in the story. Something we haven't mentioned. I like the Happiness Patrol. I don't think it's necessarily one of my all-time favourites. I don't think it's an all-time classic for me. So I gave this story 7.
Okay.
Who would have thought a Doctor Who story based around some quite feisty female leads would be the one where I scored it less than you two? Who'd have thunk it? So anyway, that gives Doctor Who and the Happiness Patrol, 23.5. Very respectable.
Yeah.
So that's the halfway point for season 25. So we're going to go and take a wee break and get a cup of coffee, and we'll be straight back. So join us for the next one, and we will be seeing if anything can be remembered. So, bye-bye.